On Good Friday in 1962, the scholar of religion Huston Smith said he encountered God for the first time. Smith joined an experiment held in the basement of Boston University's Marsh Chapel. Along with a group of fellow seminarians and religious studies scholars, he ingested some psilocybin, the psychedelic compound found in so-called magic mushrooms. The group then listened to the Good Friday service going on in the church upstairs, and many had a profound religious experience. Smith said he had already believed in God for as long as I can remember, but until the Good Friday experiment, I had no direct personal encounter with God. But his experience on psilocybin was the most powerful cosmic homecoming I have ever experienced. Huston Smith's experience was not unique. For thousands of years, humans have been taking psychedelic substances to induce so-called mystical experiences. Many people report feeling a sense of sacredness, transcendence, and awe. Others describe traveling to other domains of experience or encountering supernatural beings like gods or spirits, phenomena classically considered to be religious or mystical. When psychedelics are used in religious and spiritual contexts, they're often referred to as entheogens. The term entheogen derives from Greek, literally meaning something like to become divine within, or generating God within. More simply, it could just mean inspired or full of God. It was coined in the 1970s as a way to avoid the negative associations with terms like hallucinogen or psychedelic. In other words, entheogens are psychedelics by another name, one that emphasizes their religious properties. The Marsh Chapel experiment was a product of its time. It was designed as part of a larger initiative at Harvard University, as research on psychedelics was ramping up in the 1960s. This ended with the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, which placed heavy restrictions on psychedelics and made them more difficult to study. However, in the past couple of decades, psychedelic research has been making a comeback, shifting the conversation from the counterculture of the 1960s to mainstream discussions about mental health, therapy, and especially religion. This research gives us a better understanding of how psychedelics are believed to be a way to access spiritual or supernatural realms, agents, or experiences. Humans all over the world have been using psychedelics for rituals for thousands of years. Initiates of the ancient Greek mystery religion called the Eleusinian Mysteries ritually ingested a drink called kykeon, which may have had psychedelic effects, with some archaeologists arguing it was partly composed of a fungi containing LSD-like alkaloids. Archaeological evidence for the use of a cactus containing mescaline called peyote dates back 5,000 years in Mesoamerica, and using psychedelic mushrooms in religious ceremonies was also widespread. In 2008, archaeologists in Bolivia discovered a 1,000-year-old ritual bundle that contained traces of psilocybin and DMT. The bundle is believed to have belonged to a ritual specialist of the pre-Inca Tiwanaku civilization. Psychedelics are still used in religious rituals today. One example is the use of peyote in the Native American Church, or the NAC, which was founded in the late 19th century. Members of the NAC ingest peyote as a sacrament, and they view it as both a powerful herbal medicine and an omniscient spiritual entity. Practitioners often refer to it as Mother Peyote or Father Peyote, and consider it to have a parent-like presence, watching their thoughts and behavior to help keep them on the right path. Another example is ayahuasca, traditionally used by more than 70 indigenous groups in the upper Amazon. The indigenous people of the Amazon use ayahuasca for all sorts of purposes, including prophecy, protection, and to diagnose and cure illnesses. In recent years, ayahuasca has grown in popularity, even inspiring a Brazilian religion called Santo Daime, which combines elements of indigenous ayahuasca use with Christianity, as well as some elements of Afro-Brazilian religion. After ingesting ayahuasca, some people claim to experience out-of-body journeys through alternate dimensions, while others report encountering an otherworldly source of unitive radiance. And if you want to go deeper into the cultural side of this, in a few weeks we're offering a live ethnobotany lecture on our online learning platform, The Religion Department. It'll be taught by Indigenous historian Dr. Rosalind LaPierre, and I'll be there hosting the live Q&A. Register by going to religiondepartment.com. So we know that entheogens have been discovered, used, and adapted in many religions and many cultures, but what do we know about how they work? 4 of the best-studied entheogens include mescaline, psilocybin, DMT, and LSD. The first 3 are all naturally occurring substances. Mescaline is found in several species of cacti in the Americas. Psilocybin is found in more than 200 species of fungi, and DMT is found in a variety of plants and animals. LSD, on the other hand, is not a naturally occurring substance. It was originally made in a lab and continues to be produced synthetically. Once ingested, mescaline and LSD don't need to be altered in any way in order to create a psychedelic experience. Psilocybin and DMT, on the other hand, need to be metabolized in particular ways. Soon after psilocybin is ingested, the body metabolizes it, stripping it of a phosphate molecule and turning it into psilocin. So technically, psilocybin itself is not psychoactive until it's converted into psilocin. For DMT, when ingested on its own, it's quickly broken down by enzymes in the stomach, leading to a very short-lived psychedelic experience. However, most people who ingest DMT do so by drinking the aforementioned ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is made from the bark of the ayahuasca vine and the leaves of the chacruna shrub. The leaves contain DMT, which, as I said, are quickly broken down by the stomach, but the ayahuasca vine contains what are called MAOIs, or monoamine oxidase inhibitors, which inhibit the enzymes that break down DMT. In other words, it takes much longer for the body to metabolize the psychedelic compound when it's ingested along with MAOIs. The combination of the plants in the ayahuasca brew thus allowed the effects of DMT to be longer lasting. All four of these induce heightened mental activity, including visual and auditory hallucinations. Bill Richards, a psychologist who engaged in psychedelic studies as both a researcher and a participant, describes his experience like this. To my utter amazement, I soon discovered in my visual field the emergence of an exquisitely beautiful, multi-dimensional network of intricate neon-like geometric patterns. My awareness was flooded with love, beauty, and peace beyond anything I ever had known or wildly imagined to be possible. Awe, glory, and gratitude were the only words that remained relevant. Scientists describe experiences like this as the result of brain activity. The common psychedelic molecules that we've been talking about so far are all serotonergic, which means that they operate like the neurotransmitter serotonin in the brain. They bind to a specific subtype of serotonin receptor called the 5-HT2A receptor. Activating this receptor causes the subjective experiences associated with psychedelics, including hallucinations and reports of feelings of bliss. But for people on a psychedelic trip, they're not thinking about the 5-HT2A receptor. Notice the terms that Bill Richards used. Awe, glory, religious-y sounding terms, right? And scientists often do label these experiences as mystical type experiences. Now, personally, I think mystical is a weird term for scientists to use. It's usually associated with religious experiences, like encountering supernatural beings. And I did notice in my research that a lot of these scientists were very quick to say that they're not making any claim about the existence or non-existence of the supernatural whenever they call a psychedelic experience mystical. And it's because it's such a loaded term that many scholars of religion and psychedelics have argued it's not a useful term at all to describe these experiences. Different cultures and religious traditions interpret mystical experiences in various ways, so it's difficult to create an objective standard for what qualifies as mystical in the first place. In recent years, scholars have argued in favor of generic, academic terminology that can be applied across cultures, like psychedelic-induced non-ordinary states of consciousness, which I know does not roll off the tongue like the word mystical. But it is fair to ask, why have scientists been so quick to label these non-ordinary states of consciousness as mystical in the first place? And it's because these experiences often closely resemble those described in some religious texts and rituals, feelings of transcendence and unity, as well as visions of supernatural beings. So let's start with the emotional component, a profound feeling of connectedness. A profound feeling of connection or unity is one of the most commonly reported feelings by people on a psychedelic trip. Consider a study conducted on a group of patients with clinical depression who were interviewed 6 months after a high dose of psilocybin. The researchers found that connection was one of the strongest themes reported by the participants, and many of them described this feeling in religious terms, even patients who had previously considered themselves not to be spiritual or religious. One patient described feeling the presence of God. I've always thought that he was a man because of the way I was raised, reading the Bible, but it felt like a female energy. Other patients saw Hindu gods, and at one point during the peak, one patient felt themselves becoming the god Shiva. Others felt a connection to a nondescript supernatural force or a feeling of merging with the universe. One patient wrote, "I was everybody, unity, one life with 6 billion faces. I was the one asking for love and giving love. I was swimming in the sea, and the sea was me." Another said, like Google Earth, I had zoomed out. I was absolutely connected to myself, to every living thing, to the universe. In another study, the researcher Leo Roseman and his colleagues studied the presence of mystical type experiences in a study on using psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. To measure mystical experience, the team used an altered states of consciousness questionnaire. The Roseman team used the questionnaire to try to measure, among other things, the presence of a feeling of oceanic boundlessness. This term originates in a conversation between Sigmund Freud and the French intellectual and mystic Romain Rolland. Now, Freud considered religion to be an illusion, but Rolland argued that Freud failed to appreciate the true source of religious sentiments, a subjective feeling of something limitless, unbounded, as if it were oceanic. This questionnaire lists different types of sub-dimensions of oceanic boundlessness, a state of blissfulness, insightfulness, and disembodiment. The study ultimately found that in 20 patients with treatment-resistant depression, a psilocybin-induced experience of oceanic boundlessness predicted positive clinical outcomes. Some scholars describe this as the unitive experience of psychedelics, and it's closely related to another commonly reported religious-y sounding experience, a sense of awe. Now, the concept of awe has fascinated philosophers and religious studies scholars for years. Back in the 1800s, thinkers like Friedrich Schleiermacher and William James described it as a deep emotional response that people feel when they encounter something that is greater than themselves and beyond rational comprehension. Many argued that awe was the defining feature of religious experience. The psychologist Peter Hendricks defines awe as an emotion in the upper reaches of pleasure and on the border of fear that emerges from two feelings, a sense of vastness and accommodation. Accommodation refers to the need to adjust mental structures so as to integrate a new experience, sometimes involving fear or disorientation. I think this is partially why visionary texts like the Book of Revelation are frequently attributed to psychedelic trips, because these texts are describing a sense of awe. A mix of amazement and fear, a sense of vastness as the small prophet encounters the hugeness of God. Accommodation is at play too as the prophet attempts to adjust and integrate the new experience that they're witnessing. That's not to say these visions are reporting on an actual psychedelic experience. As we'll explore in a future video, they probably are not. But the similar themes may explain why scientists have been so quick to label these psychedelic experiences as mystical in their research. These experiences of awe and unity are said to cause people to question their own worldview, which leads us to the next religious dimension of psychedelics, their ability to alter a person's belief in the supernatural. A study conducted by a team of researchers led by Christopher Timmerman investigated how psychedelic drugs affect people's metaphysical beliefs, specifically regarding reality, consciousness, and free will. The study recruited 866 participants who were planning to attend a ceremony involving some sort of psychedelic substance. People were asked to complete a survey that measured their metaphysical beliefs at different points, 1 week before the experience to establish a baseline, and then 1 day, 4 weeks, and 6 months after. The survey assessed levels of belief in strict philosophical materialism, the idea that everything is purely physical, as well as belief in dualism, the mind and body are separate, fatalism, the belief that events are predetermined, and panpsychism, the idea that mind or consciousness is a fundamental aspect of all things. So, for example, the survey asked questions like, do you think the physical world is an illusion generated by the mind? Or another question, do you believe reality is entirely constituted by physical objects and processes? After everyone took their trip, the researchers found that psychedelic experiences tended to shift the participants' belief away from strict materialism. They showed an increased belief in the existence of non-physical supernatural realms and a unifying principle beyond scientific explanation. They also found that these changes in belief lasted up to 6 months after the psychedelic trip, and the effect was really strong for first-timers. This suggests that first-time psychedelic experiences can be particularly life-changing when it comes to beliefs about the nature of reality. The researchers offered a few reasons for why psychedelics may induce changes in metaphysical beliefs, though one interesting theory they mentioned is called the Rebus model, standing for Relaxed Beliefs Under Psychedelics. According to this model, psychedelics make our deeply held beliefs and assumptions more flexible or plastic. Essentially, they reduce the mental rigidity of these beliefs, making them easier to change. Our certainty goes down, allowing for our minds to become more open to new perspectives and ways of thinking. In the case of this study, the changes in belief were not random, but tended to move in a particular direction. Specifically, people shifted away from strict materialistic views and became more inclined toward ideas that acknowledge non-physical aspects of reality. Interestingly, while people became less certain about materialistic views, others who already held panpsychic or dualistic beliefs became more confident in their beliefs. So while psychedelics may make some beliefs more flexible, the changes do seem to push in one direction, toward more supernaturalistic perspectives. Yet perhaps the most striking way that these experiences take on a mystical dimension is through what they call entity encounters, when people report meeting beings that they describe as gods, spirits, or other supernatural or otherworldly agents. For example, one study from 2020 surveyed over 2,500 people who reported encountering some sort of entity after taking DMT. Interestingly, the most common labels that people use to describe these entities are not really specific gods, but more generic labels like being, guide, spirit, alien, or helper. A smaller number of people chose words like angel or elf or some sort of religious figure. A handful described their encounters using words like gnome, monster, or dead person. The researchers found that the experiences were rated as among the most meaningful, spiritual, and psychologically insightful lifetime experiences, with persisting positive changes in life satisfaction, purpose, and meaning attributed to the experiences. Another study of over 4,000 people compared two types of encounters: people who claim to have encountered God without the influence of drugs, and people who say they did with the help of psychedelics. Both groups reported similar sensory phenomena: hearing voices, seeing visions, or just a feeling of some deep, profound emotion. The differences were striking, though. For example, the researchers found that people in the non-drug group were much more likely to say they encountered a personality, God, or some sort of emissary of God like an angel. 41% of the non-drug group say they encountered God, versus only 18% in the psychedelic group. Those in the psychedelic group were much more likely to describe their encounter in less personal words, like encountering an ultimate reality. Now, science is still scratching the surface when it comes to understanding entheogens and religion, but it's already providing insights into many of the states of consciousness that are classically associated with religion: a feeling of awe, beliefs in the supernatural, and encounters with otherworldly beings. A growing number of researchers have also begun to reflect on the ethical questions raised by scientific work on these substances, especially questions of cultural ownership and knowledge production. Take psilocybin. As it's become the focus of a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical and wellness industry, it has also generated hundreds of patents. Critics have argued that this commercialization often bypasses indigenous communities, whose long-standing ritual knowledge helped bring these substances to the attention of Western researchers, but who rarely share in the economic or legal benefits. More broadly, some scholars argue that Western science tends to narrow its focus to clinical outcomes, treating psychedelics primarily as therapeutic or medical tools, while sidelining the cultural, ritual, and spiritual frameworks in which these substances have traditionally been understood. And this gets us back to what makes entheogens so compelling in the first place. They sit at an unusual crossroads between the material and the subjective, science and religion. On one hand, psychedelics are physical substances, molecules that interact with serotonin receptors and alter brain activity in ways that we can measure. On the other hand, the experiences they produce are described in profoundly mystical terms: unity, awe, spiritual transformation, and encounters with what many people experience as divine entities. It's this tension between chemistry and mysticism that makes entheogens such a rich object of study, and why they continue to challenge how we think about religion, experience, and the boundaries of science itself. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about this topic, we're hosting an upcoming lecture called Ethnobotany and the Invisible Reality of the Blackfeet, taught by historian of indigenous religion, Dr. Rosalind LaPierre. Head on over to religiondepartment.com to sign up. Ethnobotany is the study of how human communities understand and relate to plants, not just as biological resources, but also as entities embedded in a culture's rituals and mythology. Dr. LaPierre is a historian and a member of the Blackfeet tribe of Montana and Métis, who studies traditional ecological knowledge and Native American relationships with the natural world. They're uniquely positioned to guide this conversation, both as a scholar of indigenous history and as someone working within the traditions they study. We'll walk through how ecological understandings are sometimes embedded in religious practices, and will focus especially on the Blackfeet Nation, arguing that their interaction with the supernatural world is important for understanding their relationship with the natural world. This lecture is part of the Religion Department, our online learning platform that brings the academic study of religion to you. Speaking for myself, religion is one of the most fascinating subjects in the world, but it's also one of the hardest to study. You have to consider history, politics, art, language, economics, and culture all at once. And the Religion Department is where you can dive deep into studying religion with world-class scholars. So our ethnobotany lecture is coming up on January 20th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. I'll be there live, hosting the conversation with Dr. LaPierre and taking audience questions throughout. No worries if you can't make it live, we'll be recording the whole lecture and sending it out to everyone who registers. Registration costs whatever you want, starting at $1, though if you want to join our membership for $99 a year, you can get access to all of our past lectures. Dive into lectures like What You Don't Know About Jihad, or What Does It Mean to Be a Witch, or The Lost Tribes of Israel. To sign up, just go to religiondepartment.com, and I hope to see you there.